Hello, now in this lesson we're going to talk about the consumer. We just saw the producer, now let's briefly talk about the consumer. So the consumers are the entities that are on the end of the pipeline, so the entities that are going to read information from the topics, okay? So what does it do? It just reads data from Kafka topics and it's going to fetch messages from one or more partitions and process them in order, just like we've seen in the logs. Everything is sequential. So how does it read that information? Okay, so consumers will pull message in the batches for not one by one, just like we've seen how producers are sending this information. And Kafka will return the data starting from the last committed offset. Okay, so what is the commit about? That means that uh, that's going to save the consumer's current read position. So the last offset that was successfully processed, that's the commit. Okay, so the offsets, that's important. The offsets are stored in an internal Kafka topic that are named consumer offsets, and then the consumer can manage that information to understand what was the last commented offset. Okay, so it pulled for the message in batches right here, not one by one. That's the first step. Then the Kafka will return the data starting from the last committed offset, based on the consumer's offsets. We know that each record has an offset associated with it. And then the consumer will keep track of its own position in the log using the offsets. So if it restarts, it can resume exactly where it left off. Okay? Now, how is the offset managed? The offsets can be automatically committed at intervals or manually committed after successful processing. So this is a configuration that you can set up. All right. So the offsets again are like the checkpoints. If you commit them too soon, you might skip data. If you commit them too late, you might need to reprocess it. So let's look into this diagram right here. We've seen before the producer sending information here, and then it's replicated. It sends to the partition leader, and then it's replicated to the other partition. Another broker receives the acknowledgement and then gets the response. Now we have the consumer here on this side. The consumer will fetch the record, right? Then it's going to commit to the consumer offset topic. All right, it's going to save the read position, the last offset that was successfully processed. Then it can do the same, fetch records from a different partition, and then it commits it back here on the consumer offset topic. Okay? And then it keeps being managed by interaction with this entity. All right? So one more interesting feature that I can talk about are the consumer groups. So let's move here first. What are the consumer groups? Imagine that the consumer group is a collection of consumers that are going to work together to consume the messages from a topic. All right? Now you might be asking why? Why do we need this? Why do we need to have more than one consumer working in parallel, working together to consume the messages from a topic? And the reason for that is that because it makes scaling easy. So if we have multiple consumers, they can work together on the same topic. Each one will take a slice of the partitions, right? So instead of having a single consumer to handle all of the messages, each one is going to handle a portion of the messages. So imagine that you have like 3 different applications, but they're consuming from they produce information, they get insights from the data that is coming from a same topic. Okay, so multiple groups can independently process the same topic. All right, so one group can process the orders for fulfillment, the other group can process orders for BI reporting, and a third group can process archive orders for compliance. All right, so here we can see that we have a consumer group that have an ID named app group, all right? And we have 2 consumers inside of it, consumer 1 and consumer 2. So consumer 1 fetches the records from the partition 0. The consumer 2 fetches the record from partition 1, both from the same topic. So they're all consuming the same topic, but from different partitions at the same time. And again, committing the offset here. All right. Now, one important thing that we need to mention is rebalancing, because you do have multiple consumers that are set to consume from different partitions for the same topic. What happens when a new consumer comes into place, or when a consumer just leaves the consumer group? All right. So when the group membership changes, which means consumer leaving or being added to the group, first thing that will happen, Kafka will pause the consumption. It's going to redistribute the partitions among the active consumers. So if you had three of them, and then one left, you have two. It's going to redistribute the partitions among those two, and it's going to resume the reading from those two. Okay. So this process of rebalancing is going to happen automatically when the consumer appears, disappears, or it crashes, and it's going to ensure that the load is shared between the active consumer. One thing about this, that can pause for a small amount of time the consumption. Okay. So another thing that you're gonna see is what we call the pull loop, what basically the heartbeat. It's basically the consumer's main engine. So it pulls for new data, it processes the records, it commits the offset, and then repeat. So it keeps doing this over and over again. Pull for new data, process it, commits, repeat. So this regular pulling, it's gonna send heartbeat to keep the consumer in the group. So if the consumer stops pulling for too long, the broker is going to assume that it's that, and it's going to rebalance its partition among the other consumers that are there in the consumer group. So it keeps sending these heartbeats to keep the consumer in the group. So if after some time it doesn't detect this anymore, the cycle, the broker assumes that, all right, so let's just rebalance this. Okay, so that's what I have to talk about the consumers. I believe now we can go ahead and try it ourselves. Let's go ahead and implement producers and consumers. Let's produce some messages, consume them, so we can see how this works. Okay, see you on the next session.